Good morning, St. Albans Baptist Church and everyone else watching online. Welcome to another service from Christchurch, New Zealand. I know you're going to be inspired by the things of God today. We've got a praise and worship song for you to enjoy and an inspiring message followed by a testimony on how to find faith in God. If you live in Christchurch, New Zealand and enjoyed today's service, I would invite you to check us out personally next week. We would love to meet you. Sit back and enjoy.
Moving in our midst, I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You may not see it, you're working. You may not feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop
Good morning, church. Hope you're keeping well. Hope you're enjoying the new amount of freedom we've got now. How good is it that we have got 0 cases in the country? I mean, that's something to be really, really grateful for. I loved at the beginning of this month meeting up with other youth pastors in town as we got to do our monthly gathering in person again. And we just went around in the circle, and one of the things we shared was what had been a highlight for us from lockdown. And the thing that came to mind for me was not necessarily the most profound thing, but we had 2 doors in our home. Well, more than 2 doors, but 2 doors which weren't clicking into place. They weren't clicking shut. And I took a look at them and realised that they were sort of not clicking into the metal frame that was sort of on the door frame. And so I took off this brass frame and I filed it down and rechecked it and put them back on and then shut the door, and then both of them just clicked into place. And that sound for the next few days was music to my ears, and same with my flatmates. We loved it. So that was a small victory for us, but I think it kind of gets at the vibe of, I suppose, what I'm getting at this morning, which is what are we bringing with us from lockdown? Hopefully positively, what do we bring with us from lockdown? What is the positive legacy? And there's 2 passages we're going to look at this morning. One is Luke chapter 5 verses 1 to 11, and the other is John 21 verses 1 to 8. So you may want to pause now, you may want to take a look at those passages and just see what you get before we go any further. But we're gonna launch in now. So we'll start off with Luke chapter 5 verses 1 to 11. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought the boats to land, they left everything and followed him. John 21, verses 1 to 8. Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far off from the land, but about 100 yards off. Okie dokie. So we've gone through the levels. We've gone through 2, 4, 3, 2.5, 2, 1, and we're now in level 1. And I suppose we're looking forward, aren't we? We are surveying the land, the lay of the land, and we are trying to navigate our way through it in this time. And there are 3 main points from the passage we're looking at that I just want to highlight, which I believe are also very timely for us right now. And the first is that Jesus told the disciples to put their nets out. The second is that Jesus told the disciples where to put their nets. And then the third is the difference in reaction from the disciples between the first passage and the second upon hearing Jesus' words and his advice. So number one, Jesus told the disciples to put their nets out. The disciples heard Jesus' words and responded even. Hearing God and responding. This is stuff at the very heart of being a Christian. During lockdown, there was a huge natural window of opportunity to rest and reset, and then to really stop and hear from him through doing so, and then to reassess what we were doing. Interestingly, in the nationwide picture, I think that was especially true for Christchurch. I think that's partly down to the context of the last 10 years for the city, but also the lessons learned during that time. And I think this rest and reset had a twofold nature to it. And I think that the first aspect of it was a deepening intimacy with God, deepening rhythms of prayer and being with him, and creating new ones too. And then I think the second aspect was looking at what we're doing. And not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it, checking our calendars too. And then readjusting or planning to readjust when we were out of the lockdown time. An inner and an outward focus, hearing and responding, just like the disciples did in both passages as they made adjustments. And I think missing out on good change is obviously not ideal, but I think there's an even more subtle danger for us with this. And that's that we maybe skip the first point on intimacy or gloss over it, and then we move on to getting caught up in the height of new normal, and we maybe make a few outward changes and think we've totally nailed it. But I think the danger with that is totally missing the heart of what God was calling us into in lockdown, that whole deepening of intimacy and being with him and hearing from him. And looking forward, how good would it be if we kept digging into this stuff? How good would it be if we kept the positive rhythms and routines and habits that we gained during lockdown, and where possible, where they're transferable, bring them into where we are now, and safeguard them and value them? If we kept the conversation going with Jesus as to what do things look like for us at the moment. Because I think another interesting element, particularly on an international scale, is that things are still changing, which we'll touch upon in a bit. And maybe you've already noticed busyness creeping in. What's being pushed to one side at the moment? Maybe you feel like you've totally missed out on what God was inviting us into during lockdown. Maybe you feel like you've totally missed the rest and reset for a whole host of reasons that could be possible. And the good news is that grace and peace, it's okay. That invitation is still there and is always there for believers. It's just that the lockdown was a very obvious and natural window where this was a lot easier for many people. We can also still really embed this stuff and the spirit of rest and reset into our weekly Sabbaths, which are a great opportunity for reassessing, for reevaluating, for checking in on where we're at as we partake in that whole sort of play and pray aspect of Sabbath. I love reading Andrew's email last week, because I think he just nailed kind of the essence of this, and he really gave some practical points for it too, which was super helpful. And this is not about feeling guilty as well. It's not like, my intimacy is now at 70%, and I've made it, which is kind of, on the other hand, it's pride, I suppose. It's not this sort of scale of placing yourself on, but it's a time where we can just encourage one another to go deeper and keep going deeper and encouraging each other on these things. Alrighty, so first up was Jesus told the disciples to put their nets out. And then the second point from this passage, or these passages, was Jesus told the disciples where to put their nets. There was precision to the disciples' actions of casting their nets out again. They were not ineffective when they followed the words of Jesus with this too. And I know there was a wide variation in what it was like to be in the levels for people. And if you resonate with the disciples after a night out of catching nothing when going fishing, or maybe you feel like you have those similar feelings but are even stronger, it's just feeling worn out, tired, ineffective, or frustrated, or things are simply just not going right and you're discouraged. If you have those feelings, firstly, we want to stand with you and empathize with you. But secondly, we want to pray for you and look to Jesus together. He brings fish out of nowhere. He made the heavens and earths out of nothing. He was born of a virgin birth. He defeated death and rose again. And he is the light in the darkness. We empathize with you, but we also want to stand with you with hope as we do so. And alongside that, I'm so excited about the testimonies of family life improving, of the stories of healing, of personal growth, of revelation, of realization. I love it that we're doing testimonies every week as part of our Sunday service. And amidst a global crisis, there has been a lot of collateral beauty. The global crisis is undeniable, but the collateral beauty is also undeniable too. And there's been lots of silver linings. There's also been a lot of change in what life looks like, as we know. And with that has come dreams and ideas, which is super exciting. And I love part of the culture here at church where we want to champion those ideas. We want to champion those dreams. We want to encourage people to step out with them and put their hand up and say, hey, I've actually got this on my heart. And I think with that, I just want to chuck out two questions with that. One is, where is Jesus calling you to cast out your net? And I get really excited about that question. And then secondly, are there places you were casting your net out before where Jesus is now calling you to not do so? And let me unpack that a bit. If our lives and schedules are changing frequently, that involves picking new things up, but it also involves putting old things down. And I think with that, if our capacity was at max or close to max before lockdown, and then we find ourselves coming out of lockdown and we're taking on even more, I think that raises a few questions about balance and, whether we're actually holding on to too much at the moment. And I actually felt stirred on this point way before lockdown, probably a few months before COVID even hit the news. And I think on the one hand, and I think it's even more poignant now at this point, on the one hand, we don't want to do glorification of busyness and burnout, because that often just leads to pouring water on the fires of what God is doing, where he's moving. But on the other hand, we definitely want to be championing these ideas and these dreams and wise, sustainable stuff, which is established and stepped into. And I don't think it's an either or as well. I think it's more, let's go after these things, but let's make sure we don't do it alongside or bring with it burnout and the glorification of busyness. And let's bring that precision. Because there was precision to what the disciples did. Putting nets to the other side of the boat or out in the deep without Jesus' words do not bring the catch in. It doesn't work. My hope and prayer across the board for us as church is that we have a time where, and exciting moments as well, of discerning where God is calling us to put out our nets, to use that as a metaphor. And continuing good stuff we've already got. There's a lot of good stuff already happening that will continue, that was happening before lockdown and COVID kicked in. But also new things too. And I think interestingly, in this area, Jesus offered advice to the disciples into an area of their lives where they had expertise, they had familiarity, they had routine, they had experience. And I think that advice could easily have been dismissed. I think it might have crossed Peter's mind in that first passage in Luke. And linking into that, choosing to walk in faith is not always glamorous, particularly initially, but boy is it worth it. I mean, for those guys pulling their nets out again after a whole night of working hard, like physical, mental, emotional drainage, and then being told to put out your nets again. Yeah, it's not particularly glamorous, and if you suggest that to people, you may not get the most positive responses. But when we step out in faith and we follow Jesus' words and his nudge and what we feel individually and collectively saying, boy, is it worth it, because it leads to the pink elephant in the room with this passage, which is amidst the trials and frustrations of the disciples, when they put their nets out with precision, following Jesus' words, they had abundance in catch. That the amount of fish they got was just huge. So where is Jesus telling you to cast out your net? And I know there's a lot of thoughts and ideas already kicking around. There's a lot of dreams and stuff, and I get pumped by that. So this is an affirmation of those. This is an encouragement to those. And for those who maybe haven't felt like they've dreamt yet, this is an encouragement to dream and think and reassess and get excited about that. Alrighty, number 3. The disciples reacted differently to Jesus' words the second time around in the second passage. In the first passage, I think Peter shows some uncertainty, as I just said, to Jesus' advice. And in the second passage, the disciples immediately responded to Jesus' words. They didn't question it, they just immediately responded. And Peter also even just jumped in the sea to get to Jesus. He swam to Jesus. He couldn't wait for the boat to reach Jesus. In the second passage, this isn't their first rodeo. They are familiar with Jesus, the person of him, and his ways. And they've spent 3 years just seeing these kingdom principles, these kingdom truths and ways of operating. And they've done them themselves. They've stepped into them themselves. They've seen it again and again and again and again and again and again. And I think a phrase which is kind of looking at us now and where we're at, a phrase which is obviously doing the rounds at the moment, is this new normal phrase. The fact that we're in a new normal. And I think for some this has occurred, obviously, whether they like it or not. For others it's more maybe from a series of voluntary actions, or maybe it's a combination of both. But I think here's the question, right, which I think quite a lot of us are already thinking and have asked. Is it going to last? Is this new normal going to last? Or maybe a more apt way of putting it is, are these series of new normal going to last? Because the same chat was happening after the earthquakes, right? That we were in a new normal, things were going to change. But to what extent did they? And my 2 cents on the new normal is that I think there's going to be, at the very least, noticeable and substantial pockets of change on a local, national and international level. I think even on the international level we are seeing some potential actual change going on in the States, which is then rippling across to the UK, even in other places too. I would add, though, that even without COVID, I think we're in a time where cultural change is at its most accelerated ever. And I don't think that's a controversial statement to make. And I think a lot of these changes were happening without COVID, but COVID has certainly been, well, I think of school when we would do a science experiment and it would be things which would either explode in water, and the teacher would say you only get a tiny bit, and we'd all be trying to smuggle like whole lumps of metal, I think it was potassium, to drop it in the water and get the beakers exploding. And COVID's been a bit like that, right? It's gone bang, and it's at the very least been a catalyst for cultural change. But cultural change is already going very quickly anyway. So I think there will be a series of new normals. But what about for us as Christians and for us as church? And I think back to the house church movement, particularly in the early 2000s, where people were leaving the traditional models of church and going to house church. But the interesting thing with that, though, is that they changed the shell, the outer model, but they were still experiencing the same, in their eyes, the same problems. And I think that reminded me that if you want to see real change for us as church, I think a big way for us to look at that is inner to outer again. It's those 2 points that I mentioned with the rest and the reset. And we want to see a move of God, right? We don't want to just see a new normal. We want to see a move of God. Some would use the word revival at this point. And that that word has been used a lot, and some might feel it's maybe been used too much and too lightly, but we all want to see a move of God. But if we want to really see things kick off with that, it starts in the inner place. It starts with the heart change, from the inside to the out, hearing from him and following his lead. Whether it's David Wilkerson in New York, or the Scottish revival, or the Welsh revival, or in Argentina, or James O. Fraser in China, they all started from that inner place. And if I had to pick one thing that would be a giveaway that a move of God was round the corner, immediately round the corner, it would be a sort of a sense of an unstoppable individual and corporate heart for prayer kicking off. People falling in love with God afresh, not just a tick list sort of thing with prayer, not us saying, all right, I'm going to pray for 3 hours on every morning starting from 4 a.m, but just incremental shifts, incremental changes in our prayer routines and our rhythms, and growing deeper in our relationship with God. And let me give you a practical way of putting this, to the extent that if we had a lockdown again and the question was asked, what is the main thing that's gone well in this time? The very first thing that would be said would not be introvert time, or cleaning up the garage, or fixing the 2 faulty doors in your home, all 3 of which I very much enjoyed and have been good things. They're not bad, but the very first thing mentioned is a heart for prayer, is a grasping of the exhilarating truth that prayer causes things to happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. That for me would be a very practical sign. I'll leave you with a story from China with James O. Fraser, amazing man of faith. And at one point, I think heading into winter, he realised that it would take about 5 days to reach certain villages in the mountains around China where he was at, who he was a missionary to. And so he decided, well, maybe in this time, rather than travelling 2 days there and 2 days back and then taking a couple of days to get the service going, 5 or 6 days, what if I just spent that time praying for them during winter? And so he did. And he went and visited these people after spending this time praying for them. And what he noticed was that the growth in these people compared to those he'd been in contact with and doing services with in another area of the country, the people he'd been praying for had grown a lot more than those he'd had face-to-face contact with. Now, is face-to-face contact not needed? Of course it is. Of course we need to meet, of course. But prayer causes things to happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. Moves of prayer lead to moves of God. So, what positive legacy are we bringing forward from lockdown? What are we safeguarding? What are we protecting? What are we valuing? And where is Jesus asking you to cast your net right now? Those are my 2 questions. So God bless you guys. I hope that was helpful. I love this sort of stuff, so feel free to grab me and have a chat about it as well. So have a great week. All the best. Bye.
Hey guys, so John has asked me to share a bit about my testimony on how I became a Christian. I was not raised in a Christian family. I had no idea who God was. I had no idea what the Bible was, and I had no idea what it meant to be a Christian. But yeah, so when I was about 8 years old, my mum found this program called God's Warriors, which was kind of like a youth group, but for primary school age kids. And they ran the program at my primary school. And my mum, the first thought that she had was, oh my gosh, yes, I get to get rid of the girls for a whole afternoon. And so she sent me and my sisters there, and they ran the program once a week, I think. And so we were there every week, pretty much. Yeah, I loved it. Like, I loved hearing stories about God. I loved hearing stories about how God helped people get through difficult times. And yeah, it was such an amazing place to be in, especially because in primary school I was bullied quite a bit. And so being able to go to God's Warriors was incredible because I felt safe there and I felt loved and accepted for who I was. And yeah, it was just amazing. But sadly, that all had to come to an end because I did become too old to go. And so since leaving God's Warriors, I didn't really learn more about God, and so my faith kind of disappeared, and so did the memory of God's warriors as well. But yeah, fast forward to high school, I just remember being bullied so much more than primary school. I was bullied I was bullied on my appearance, and like I was bullied on the way that I acted, and yeah, it was just a very tough time. I was a very insecure teenager. I hated the way I looked, I hated the way I felt, I hated my friends. Like my friends that I would hang out with every day, they would drink, they would smoke, they would do drugs, they would bunk classes all the time, and thankfully I never got involved with that stuff because I knew it was wrong, but I thought they were the only friends that I was worthy of having, and so I kind of just like sucked it up and just moved on with life. But yeah, I remember one night I just couldn't, I went through a really rough week, and I just remember wanting to give up, and I was crying so much that night, and I didn't want to continue with life because I felt like there was nothing else worthy to live for anymore. And so yeah, so I just wanted to end it there. But then the memory of God's warriors popped into my mind, and it reminded me of like how happy I was back then, and how I was accepted for who I was, and how like hearing stories about God really like inspired me to be a better person. But yeah, so I just remember like, oh my goodness, I need to pray, like I need God right now. And so I prayed my whole heart out to God that night, and I just prayed that he would help me. And then I heard a voice tell me that I was loved, that I am worthy, and that I am important. And my whole body got chills, and I just remember feeling warm and happy and like at peace with myself. And I questioned it. I was like, is that truly God, or is that just myself thinking that? And I was like, no, it can't be God, because like I've never heard I don't know what God sounds like. And that was the first time that I actually heard God's voice, and so I was pretty skeptical about it. But anyway, so I kind of moved on from that, and then a few months later I am now at Living Springs Kids Camp. It is my first camp, and I am really excited and really nervous. But I think it was the night before the campers arrived, I was hanging out with these two girls, and they're two Christian girls, and I remember becoming pretty close with them. And the night before the campers arrived, we were in the cabin together, and we were just talking, and then out of the blue I just asked them like, hey, can you tell me about your testimony? Can you tell me about God? And they just like started talking about what it's like to be a Christian and how God has helped them through their lives. And I just remember like that same feeling that I felt a few months ago, like of the warmth and the peace and the chills, it all came back, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is God. I heard God tell me that I am loved, that I am worthy, that I am an important person. And I told the girls, and they confirmed it as well, that that was God. And on that night I gave my heart to the Lord, and I became a Christian, and ever since then I've been following Jesus every day, and every day is a blessing because I have God, and I know that no matter what season I'm in, that I will always have God by my side. And yeah, it's just amazing. But yeah, so that is how I became a Christian. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And our prayer is that you have sensed God's presence with you, whether that be through the worship time, whether that be through the message, or the personal story that got shared at the end, but that somehow your heart has resonated with it. And if you would like to let us know how you have been impacted, or you would just simply like to get to know us better, you can email us on office@sabc.org.nz, or you could go to our website www.sabc.org.nz, Or find us on Instagram or Facebook and like our page or follow us, just to kind of keep in the loop of what we're up to here at SABC. Now, if you would like to find and join in a deeper way with us and would like to give to the ministry here at SABC, all the details of how you can follow through with that are going to be on the following slide. Once again, we've loved having you join with us. Haere rā whānau.